an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Raybearer Chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. In these chapters, wow, Tarisai just straight up edits her own memory. Like, is this going to work? It feels like it worked. And while I am into it, I'm also really concerned about repercussions. I get why she did it. I'm not mad, but yikes. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh is here in the chat with me. So these are very, very eventful chapters. And I wanted to mention, because I had voiced some concerns about the length of the chapters in the last episode, I looked it up, and on paper, like if you're looking for the actual printed book, it says that it's 400 pages. On Kindle, it says it's like just over 300 pages. So I think I've been overreading, or at least for the first episode I did. This episode I did what it said was about 40 pages, which felt to me like around 50. And I think that's right. So I'm going to be going under on the estimates according to Kindle. It just felt like, you know, a lot happened. And normally 50 pages equals about an hour and a half audiobook. And this was almost 2 hours, this section. So I may have even overread for this one, but so be it. I'm just going to try and be more careful. So I just want to alert anybody who happens to be reading along with me, because I know that some people do that, especially if they have the print book and they're kind of like, what are you doing? That's why the Kindle and the print books don't match up in that way. So this is so interesting and exciting. I can't get over how advanced the plot becomes in such a short time. She's really moving things along here. So we start off with chapter 5, right where we left off, where she's seeing the prince for the first time, and she is feeling this overwhelming desire to kill him. And she has another part of her that is aware that this is not like under her control, that this isn't something that she wanted, and fights back. And then all of a sudden realizes, like, well, even if you were to give in to this impulse you're having, what you were ordered to do was wait until he actually anointed you. So she's able to sort of use that as a loophole and, you know, back off from this feeling, even though it still rears its head here and there. And Mbali, who, by the way, just an aside, later on, we find out that the counselors are not supposed to, the women are not supposed to have carnal knowledge of anybody except the king or the emperor. But we have like this memory of Mbali sleeping with somebody else, if I'm not mistaken. I should probably go back and check that. But that feels like an incredibly dangerous thing for Tarisai to know about. I don't know if I have that wrong, though, because they share a mind. So I have to imagine that if these women were sleeping with somebody else, it would be knowledge that they all shared. So maybe I just have that wrong. Maybe I need to go back and check. And the mental link thing is really interesting that happens, because I don't think that I really understood how that worked until we get Tarisai attached to it. And then I was like, wow, this is like way more like, it reminded me, I'm so sorry, Jordan, the author of these books. I apologize right away for making this comparison, but please forgive me. The pack mentality in the Twilight books, when we are in Jacob's POVs, it feels like that, where everybody's thoughts are sort of pooled together and there doesn't seem to be a lot of control over it. Now, Mbali has an ability to like guard herself mentally from when she first like is in contact with Tarisai. So it's possible that maybe she has a mental block that keeps everybody else from knowing other business of hers. But I don't know how, like, it feels like the link they have is meant to completely override everything like that. Whether it actually does or not, I think it's meant to. So, Ashleigh's in the chat. Oh my God, you're right. I hadn't made that comparison. I'm sorry. It's just one of those things. When something is really well known in pop culture, you have to reference that thing because most people are going to get it. That and Harry Potter, we all like, even if you haven't read it or watched it, you kind of like know what we're talking about. Unless you're Rashawn. So she gets left alone with the prince, and Mbali tells them that they'll be watched when she does this. Like, she walks away, but she's at the same time like, yeah, we're going to know what's happening, though, just FYI. And the prince, he's not what I was expecting at all. I'm really intrigued because he feels like he shouldn't be as sweet and sensitive as he is, considering how he was brought up. I just can't imagine being raised in the environment he was, surrounded by people who just fucking fall all over themselves to at least pretend that they adore you, and not turning into a monster. And he hasn't. He is an absolute doll. Like, to a point that's definitely a little bit of a problem. Later on, somebody tells him that his weakness is that he tries too hard to see the good in everybody. And while, that's one of those things that that's the kind of weakness that's often put forth by when people are writing stories like The Walking Dead, where what we're really trying to celebrate, in quotes, is like the worst parts of humanity. I don't feel like that's what this author is doing. They are just pointing out that in his position that can be a liability. And I don't know that he seems best suited to this role. I just worry about him. So when he talks to Tarisai, his name is Ekundayo, by the way. Ekundayo says, well, don't you love me? Because he says, they all say they love me. And she says, well, I don't love you. He cocked his head aghast. Not even a little? Of course not. He looked so heartbroken, I wanted to comfort him. It's just, I've never met you before, I stammered. But everyone loves me. Though, I guess they could be lying. Father thinks I trust people too much. Maybe you're lying. Maybe you do love me after all. And that was my favorite, honestly. Him being like, immediately thinking maybe they're lying. And he doesn't even let himself go there, really. The thought occurs to him, but he immediately moves on to the more positive of the two possibilities, which is that she's lying about not loving him, which is just so indicative of the kind of person he is. It's just, I feel like this is going to resurface for us a lot. And she tells him, because he reaches out to touch her, she's like, she stumbles and he reaches out to steady her, and she pulls away from him abruptly because she's not used to people touching her. And he wants to know why she reacts this way. And in an effort to get him to leave her alone, like very purposefully, she tells him she's a spy and can see everything you've ever done. And it is really beautiful what happens here. She thinks that he's going to be scared, and he is impressed and fascinated and wants her to try it on him. And this is the sort of thing that, like, I could imagine other people see, like, considering this to be a bit of a security breach that she tries this on him. But here it is, hundreds of small faces barreled toward mine, drowning me in presents and kisses, sickly sweet voices feverish with desire. I love you, Ekundayo. I'd die for you, Ekundayo. Pick me, Ekundayo. Pick me, pick me, pick me. Most of the children had frightened him. Every now and then, a child made him feel safe, but they almost always failed some strange test I didn't understand. Then Mbali would take the child away, and Dio would return to his hiding place behind the curtain, heaving quiet sobs that no one ever heard. And this becomes sort of the linchpin between the two of them. Both of them feel so isolated and alone. They don't understand their own situations very well. They don't know why they're being, like, everything's being withheld from them. And he, in this moment of connection between the two of them, decides that he's going to do something that it turns out Mbali has warned him multiple times not to do. So he tries to use the ray on her, which is the mental connection. You know, that's an aspect of the ray. And because she doesn't love him, it doesn't work. And Mbali comes in and is reprimanding him for trying it too early. He's like, you know that this is how this goes, and now she has to go because you did it too quickly, and they get one chance. And as he's being pulled away from her, she has a moment of panic, realizing that yet again she's being separated from somebody. And she thinks to herself, let's see, the memory of the screaming Nantish boy wrestled away by guards still lay fresh in my mind. I knew I couldn't fight Mbali. Heart racing, my mind shifted solutions like puzzle pieces. Invisible tutors breathed down my neck, and Wuin's words echoed. You have been prepared for this. I crossed my arms and told Mbali, I take orders from the prince, not you. She fixed her large dark eyes on mine. Say that again, child? I swallowed hard. I don't take orders from you. Nothing is more important than loyalty. You said that earlier, so I'm not going anywhere unless he wants me to. Mbali gave a slow, cunning smile. Congratulations, Dio. Your friend has passed a test that no candidate has before her. Which is interesting because, you know, evidently the whole thing is just learning to fight back against the people who are allegedly in charge. Which, the fact that this child and loyalty to this child supersedes the adults around him is really, this is something that I will never get used to. You know, the idea of a boy king. And granted, like, the emperor is still alive and he is not in that position yet. But still, it's always a little bit unnerving to realize how much power somebody of that age has. And just the checks and balances that I think of being in place, in the end, aren't necessarily there. They are advisors. They are meant to counsel. And he gets his way in the end. That is to say, you know, if his father were taken out of the equation, but his father is still alive. So this leads to her getting to stay, even though he tried the ray on her and it didn't work. And Mbali says, her mind must still connect with your ray. You may not offer Tarisai your hand in counsel until it does. But give her time. If she succeeds in this and other trials, you may anoint her. And poor Tarisai is so excited for a second, and when she uses the words anoint her, she's immediately like overwhelmed with this feeling because of the instructions she's been given. And he tries to anoint her right now, and she tells him no, and he seems genuinely upset over it. I won't, you can't make me. And she's saying this to the, impulse in her. If that's what you want, said Dio, sounding crestfallen, I can't force you to join. I didn't mean you. I meant... And here comes Melu. So later on, Melu appears again. And it's all a vision, but I really get the impression this is him. He's communicating with her via some other way. His spirit rode where his imprisoned body could not go, coursing through riverbanks, seeping into the bedrock of an An-Elioba palace. His pleading voice reverberated through the walls. It is a shame you must hurt the boy, but an Eru may not resist a master's wish. Give in, daughter, and we will both be free. I have no master, I snarled. The apparition gave a ghostly sigh, long and grim. Yes, you do. So that's the end of that chapter, and I just really hated this. I felt so bad for her. And it still hadn't even entered my head, like what happens later with her getting to choose in a way that I hadn't seen coming. So yeah, that just, I just really, the dread that this author has built in these chapters is so excellent, because you really don't see a way out of this. Like, at least I didn't. And I couldn't imagine a way around it. It felt like every loophole was closed to her. And what she decides to do instead was remarkable. So she wakes up here, and it turns out that she passed out. She was fighting against the impulse of her Eru side, that so hard that she fainted. And when she wakes up, Kira is here. And I love there's a moment where she's given a cold drink of mango juice that has, as she calls them, slippery white rocks attacked my face. Ice, Kira informed me. Weird, right? I heard it keeps meat from going bad. Oluwan imports blocks from places like Nantes and Birislav, cold realms up north. I frequently think about things like this, what it was like before ice was just available everywhere, and how incredibly upsetting. There are so many modern comforts that we take for granted, but things like that, refrigeration is like, in any way, is one of the biggest ones for me, that I genuinely am like, God, what did people used to do? What they used to do was they would dry things, they would preserve them that way. They would can stuff if the technology allowed at the time. They would pickle. There were all other ways of preserving, but it meant that so much that they could have fresh, it was just so short-lived. And it's just sort of fascinating to me to think about every drink that you had as a kid being maybe lukewarm. You never had a cold drink unless you were drinking from a stream that's right there, or unless it's winter and you live somewhere that it gets cold. And wild. And, considering the way that she grew up, it's kind of interesting that Tarisai never has interacted with ice before. She was in a pretty, in its way, luxurious surroundings. Later on, Kira points out her privilege to her in a lot of ways, but not things like that. It feels like that the luxuries were things more just for security purposes than for enjoyment. So they're staging a kidnapping of Prince Ekundayo. Whoever finds him gets a chance with Dio's ray, but you didn't wake up, so I stayed to see if you are all right. And this is one of the first times that we get this moment with Kira, and it happens a bunch until the jump ahead in time, where she says, Mama says, and gives a little piece of her mother's wisdom. Mama says a caravan mustn't travel faster than its slowest camel. Besides, I'm nervous about trying the ray. And she brings up Mama says a whole lot, and later on has a really incredibly moving, like a monologue that I found really like just affecting. And I enjoyed this a great deal. But in the moment, she just keeps bringing up the mama says, and I was like, girl, would you stop? Oh my God. So it's mentioned here that he tried the ray on Tarisai already, and Kira is like, well, that's like, I mean, it will work once you love him, and it'll feel good after that. And then she tells us, after you're anointed, you can't live without the ray. Even my singing can't cure council sickness. I forgot you were raised under a rock. Because she's looking at her with the blank expression. When you're anointed, the ray binds your body to the council. So if you ever get separated or abandon the council, you get sick, sweating, fever. Eventually you go mad. That's why no council has ever committed treason. And that's why the Emperor's 11 are always together, touching and kissing like that. If they stay apart for long, they get the sickness. Wow. I didn't realize it was like that. And that feels incredibly sinister to me. I mean, there's clearly massive benefits, but oh my God, you basically get your free will completely taken away. And you make this agreement at the age of like 15, younger for some of them. I don't think so. Can you imagine your 15-year-old self making a choice like that for you? You were an idiot. I promise, you were. Everybody who's 15 is an idiot. I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're 15, you're an idiot. And one day you'll look back and you'll realize that and it'll be fine. That's not to say that you don't have your own kind of intelligence and potential and whatnot, but trust me, you're a fool because that's the nature of being 15. That's just how it is. Making that kind of choice that binds you to people in a way that you physically can't leave behind. Ever. There's no changing your mind on this. No, thank you. I don't think so. And this makes Tarisai wonder, because she misses her mother all the time. It makes her wonder whether or not she misses her mother because of some weird bond instead of actual affection. And I loved that she made that connection, because that's a sort of mature way to step back and be like, wow, what if I'm being influenced by something? So this is when Kira points and says, if you succeed at uniting minds, you're sure to be one of his 11 unless you're him. And she points at this boy over in the corner. And he is so tall that at first Tarisai thinks that he's like a grown man. And it turns out he's only 13 years old. And he was a pit fighter. And he immediately connected with Dio's ray. But he wouldn't accept being anointed. Which is interesting. I am assuming now, looking back at, what winds up happening later, that he didn't want to be anointed because he didn't want his mind joined so that Dio could see some of his thoughts. And I don't know. I think that's probably why. He says later too that it means that he would never get to see his mother again, which that is a pretty big motivator if you're close to family or concerned about family. I could understand that. So let's see. And also Kira says something about a powerful Alagbato used to guard your savannas so the harvests never failed, but he disappeared some 10, 11 years ago. No one knows why. And, her mother is why. So the Prince's Bear is what this kid is nicknamed. We find out his name later, but at the moment they call him the Prince's Bear. He's from Derma. And there's a bunch of talk about people from Derma. In general, it's really looked down upon. Later on, there's a pretty fierce debate about whether Dermish people should be tested separately because they're bringing down the average grades of certain group projects and logic puzzles and stuff. And it's just a really interesting, we'll get to that. But this is the first, because, okay, So I'm going to lay my cards on the table here. As a white person, whenever you, come into something with the kind of privilege that white people have, you bring your own weird, like, perhaps awareness, or sometimes the opposite, of the fact that what you're reading has been written by somebody of color. And especially for me, knowing so much more about the, like, innate prejudices we have now than I used to know, and understanding more of it, I am able to pick up on a lot of, like, sort of allegories and metaphors and whatnot for racism and oppression in writing than I would have before. Even sometimes it could be pretty obvious and I may not have picked up on it. So that unfortunately leads to this thing sometimes where, as a white person, I will go into reading something that's written by someone who's black and think, and be waiting unconsciously for the metaphor for racism to turn up, because I am assuming if this person's black and they're writing a novel, there is definitely going to be some expression of their experience with oppression in the story, that black pain is going to factor into the story somewhere. And to a point, that is not great for me to just assume that's going to crop up, because black people should feel free to write stories where they don't have to work through their own trauma for a story, like, I don't like that that's something that I sort of wait for. It was an unconscious thing, but it was definitely happening. And when this whole Dermish question came up, I started to do the whole, like, oh, here it is kind of thing in my head. And I had to stop myself and be like, what am I doing? Like, sure, there's nothing wrong with writing about racism as a metaphor for things. It's certainly, that's the Broken Earth series. That's a massive part of it. It's not even a metaphor really anymore. It's just such a huge segment of the story. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does box people in a way that isn't fair, And that said, there are some interesting, like, references here and there that I certainly think are pointed, and I just there's something, like, that I have to look at there, is all I'm saying. With me having this sort of expectation of a story that is written by a black person, I just assume that there's going to be a larger, racism allegory in it. And that's not necessarily true or necessary. And why am I feeling like that's going to just inevitably be the case? So I just wanted to address that here because of my reaction to the whole, I can't decide if one would call it racism against Dermish. If, like, I can't tell if their skin is a slightly different color. So it appears that people can tell by looking at somebody whether they are from Derma. So I think racism is probably the word to use here. But yeah, I just wanted to address this here. And it turns out that they, like, chained this kid to the bedpost. And I liked this moment where Kira is trying to act like it's funny, but she has a sort of air to her that gives away the fact that she's ashamed of this and realizes that it's not cool, but she didn't stop them, And, like, as somebody who has been in this position myself before, where I felt like something was icky and not cool, but I didn't necessarily speak up. And sometimes it was because I couldn't understand what my problem was. Like, I assumed that it was me, and the fact that I had an issue with something was some problem of mine, and that I was overreacting. I really felt for her in this moment. And yet, despite her looking sheepish, she then says, Mama says Dermish people are like rabid dogs. I'm not going near him. And Ew. You know, like the whole we shouldn't leave somebody behind with the caravan thing from her mom. That's a good theory. That feels like a nice thing to, you know, just be like, care for the least among you. And then immediately followed up by, oh, but these people are trash. Don't even talk to them. It's just such a fucking perfect, like, summation of how many people can carry completely conflicting ideologies and they just don't seem aware of it at all. So Tarisai's looking at him, not really sure how to handle this because she's been left alone in the room with him. And then she has to pee really bad. And I found this so amusing. I thought she was going to ask where a privy was. But she asks for a chamber pot and he points them out. And then she asks for a privy screen. And he's like, yeah, they don't allow that. And he says most candidates relieve themselves in the morning or late at night when the gender screen is still drawn. Don't worry, I won't look. How do you time that and make yourself always have to pee and poop in the morning and evening, and then that is the only time? Like, and also, it's one thing to have to pee in front of somebody. It's a very different thing to have to take a shit in front of somebody. And he says, like, after you're done with it, put it back in the corner and the servants take it away. Can you imagine having to chill in a room with a big pot full of shit in it and just try and act like that's not happening? No, thank you. And this is like how people used to have to live. We didn't have plumbing until fairly recently in our history. But oh my God, I can't handle it. Ugh. I remember, like, it's just wild, the stench that shit leaves. And I'm sorry, guys. Just real quick. I had to use the bathroom at Walmart the other day. I stepped into the bathroom and immediately I was like, what's happening? Because it smelled terrible. And there's a difference between the smell that's left in the air when somebody takes a shit and they flush the toilet, and the smell that's left in the air when somebody's shit is still there. And I was like, what's happening? And I went into the stall and it looked like somebody had just exploded all over the whole back wall. And the smell it was a pretty big bathroom and you weren't getting away from it. And if you've got a room like this that tends to have more than one person in it, imagine if the servants don't come and take away the several chamber pots for a time. Like, just literally kill me. Oh my God. Human waste. What a flaw. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just had to address this here because the idea of, like, not getting any privacy in the first place is so awful. And then the whole dealing with a chamber pot thing, on the other hand, is so much more awful. I hate all of this. So there's this moment here where Tarisai touches the dais. The stone remembered a boy who had slept there decades ago. Over and over he had rasped into the blankets, the lady, the lady, the lady. Excuse me? What is going on? I had been assuming that they were calling her the lady as a code name, but that she had a name. And the fact that he's saying the lady instead of her name, is this the woman that was, like, erased? Is that what she is? Is she the one? I am super interested. Okay, so this is when this boy, let's see. Here it is. Kira says you were able to connect with Daio's Ray. That means you love him, so you can't be all bad. And when she tries to say, like, when she says that, he claims, like, bears can hurt people, and she tries to argue you don't have to do anything against your will, and he's like, I mean, yeah, we do. If we're anointed, we don't really get a say. And let's see, here it is. Kira says you've lived here for ages. Can you find us food? Can't you break that chain on your arm? So she goes and finds the key, because he's like, yeah, if I could break it, I would have broken it. But go and find the key that they toss somewhere over there, and then we'll be good. And she asks him what his hallow is. And he says, now would be a good time for me to lie. Because friends can't be afraid of each other, and I want to be your friend. And finally he says, you twisted your ankle months ago. It healed stiffly, so you're easy to trip. There's a knot between your neck and your left shoulder. Your reflexes will be slower on that side. When you blink, your right eye closes faster. It causes a blind spot. He trailed off. I see weakness. Bones, muscles, ruptures. They sing to me, tell me all their secrets. That's why Father put me in death matches. With my hallow, I never lost a fight. Ama, my mother, made me come here. She thought if I joined the council, I could help people, become a doctor or a priest. I'd like that. But if I join, I can't ever see her again, and she would be stuck with Father forever. And we find out later that his dad kills his mother, so his reticence is extremely well-founded, as it turns out. But, it doesn't seem like he was allowed to leave after connecting with the prince at this point, so I don't really think that him choosing to wait on becoming anointed actually did him any good. I understand his reasoning, but I just don't think that, practically speaking, it made any difference. So then we go to chapter 7, and it turns out we get jumped ahead by like 5 years? 4 years. 4 years, because she's 11 and now she's 15. And we get like an impression that she is really enjoying her new life here. She likes being around people. The whole command that she was given has sort of fallen to the back of her mind. And she is managing to sort of pretend that isn't why she's here. And the prince has been asking her repeatedly if she loves him every morning since she came here, trying to get her to allow him to anoint her and try again. And she just keeps refusing, but is still clearly favored. And a lot of people are very jealous. They want to be the one, and she is, but is rejecting it, which they deeply resent. So we have all of these, my pain at Dio's growing council festered like an ulcer. As individuals, I liked them, but I envied their intimacy. After Sanjit, Kira had been first to connect with Dio's ray. Joyfully, she had accepted his hand in councilhood, and so every other candidate from the Blessed Valley had been expelled. I danced with Kira at her celebration feast, grinning to suppress my tears. I knew that I could not be anointed, and now, if I ever left the children's palace, I could not take Kira with me. It hadn't really sunk in for me that there were going to be multiple candidates from certain areas, so that there was only one person from each area. That's specifically mentioned in the opening of the book, but I had forgotten how that worked. And we find out later that there was a boy who got selected, and one of the girls from the group that remained just got up and jumped out a window and killed herself because she wasn't chosen. And I swear to God, that really was disturbing to me. I feel like this author is extremely good at dropping in little, very disturbing side notes while still maintaining a sort of overall positive energy to the main story. I feel like those disturbing notes for certain writers could take things over and make it feel much more overshadowed in a way that would seem kind of gloomy and oppressive. And there is a certain oppressiveness to it, but it feels much more distant, almost like the way that Tarisai is sort of distancing herself from what she knows her mission is supposed to be here, and she's just putting off looking at that. And that's how it feels for me. It's like there's all these awful things happening, but I can focus on my friend here at the center of everything and how well things wind up going for her, and I don't have to think about the garbage sort of swirling around her that's inevitably going to ignite into flames. So there's this moment here. So Dio gestures for her to join him and Sanji and his anointed ones for breakfast. Hot-faced, I slunk past the other candidates, feeling dozens of jealous eyes bore into me. They would be released for breakfast by the location of their sleeping mats. The last to reach the banquet chamber had the skimpiest pick of food, and shortest time in which to eat it before the day's tests began, which comes up later and is most definitely orchestrated very specifically on purpose, I feel. So, let's see, in the 4 years I had passed by Dio's side, I had seen no monster, only a boy with a big, fragile heart and hope that could fill an ocean. I had refused to try Dio's ray test again, assuming the lady would come retrieve me, impatient with my inaction. But as months bled into years, I could come to only one conclusion. The lady had forgotten me entirely. And I was like, yeah, no, she definitely hasn't. I'm sure she's aware it may take some time, and I don't think that she expected to put you in there and find this all falling into place within a year, but I am certain she's wondering what the fuck is going on. And as it turns out, her people have been spying throughout. They haven't been, necessarily there every hour of the day, but they've been coming and checking in very consistently, and they never left her alone, really. So Sanjit is obviously, there's a connection between him. He's the prince's bear, by the way. I don't think I ever mentioned his name earlier. But Sanjit, first of all, is fine as hell. He has grown even taller than he did when she first met him, and is really muscular and a really, really good fighter, and just extremely, every time that the mention of carnal knowledge comes up, she thinks of him and is like, can't do that. And I'm like, oh man, I really do feel for her, because once she gets anointed, he is taken off the table as an option, which just really does not seem fair. I guess, I don't know how strict those rules are. But anyway, he has still refused to be anointed, and he is doing a lot of the teaching with the other fighters. And there's this kid who tries to act like he's a cheater because he's using his halo, and does the whole "do you know who my father is" thing, to whom Sanji says, well, if you get jumped in a fight, are you going to call your parents? And I really liked that response. The kid does not have anything left to say to that. He rarely talked to anyone except Dio, whom he shadowed like a grim archangel. But when the others had gone to sleep, I would hear the gender partition screen shift aside. Footsteps padded to my sleeping mat, and a pair of pleading eyes would burn down on mine. "Please," Sanjit rasped, "take them. Make the memories disappear." Gruesome images barraged us both, ribs cracking, limbs bruising, bones shattering beneath Sanjit's bare hands as betting crowds egged him on to fight. His father's voice was always the loudest. "Is this hell? I'll teach you hell. I'll teach you what I taught your mother if you don't get back in the pit, boy." His father sounds like a real piece of shit. And I just feel like, again, this author is very good at making us feel how awful this was for him without it being too gratuitous, without her going on and on. It doesn't ever feel like she's overdoing it. And because of that restraint, it's more effective than ever, So, at one point, eventually, he asks for her memories, and she's surprised and doesn't know that she can do that. And once she tries, it turns out that her memories can sort of help to override his bad ones. And it calms him in some ways. The more I shared my story, the longer Sanjit's unhappy memories stayed away. Some days he didn't ask me to erase his stories. He just asked for more of mine. I'll run out of memories to show you, I warned him, and he shrugged. Then I guess we'll have to make more, Sunshine Girl. I love that response, by the way. So after weapons training, he sort of vanishes and they go into the rest of their testing and she's looking around for him and she doesn't see him. And she winds up not reconnecting with him until the very end of the day when she finds out what happened to his mother. And it's really awful. So we get this story time, which she has heard many, many times. It's a call and response story. And I wanted to mention, because, you know, this is something that I feel, again, because so much of, especially when you're white, but just being American, so much of our educational systems, like, recommended reading just revolves around white European writers. And there is a certain, like, sameness to a lot of the ways that stories are told in those. And a lot of the legends and folklore, even contained within those stories, is really similar to one another. And the stories that are told in this book contain a lot of onomatopoeia, repetitive sort of, like, sound effect, and almost a chanting quality that while reading it, I was sort of not getting it. And then I listened to the audiobook, and God, the woman narrating the audiobook is spectacular. And she does this story and really fucking nails it. And I was like, oh, that's how that goes. That's awesome. Like, it really brought it to another level and made me feel it in a way that it was like, okay, I see how this is like a group story, that it's not just one person telling, even though that is the majority of it. There's an energy going back and forth between the storyteller and the audience. And the call and response thing is key to, like, that sort of, what's the word I want? Momentum, I think. So yeah, this, it was just really beautiful to listen to this story. And this is explaining, too, the pelican and the significance of the pelican, because it's pelican oil that he uses to anoint his counselors. The pelican glides from star to star, shaking stories from its wings, whoom, whoom, to fill 1,000 worlds. The pelican is older than earth and water, older than even than the sun. It does not always have wings and a bill. Sometimes it has hooves and a tail, or paws and a mane, or no body at all. Who is the pelican? Am the storyteller. Yes, am, called was, called will be. I have to say again how much I love this name, the God's name being Am, and it being Am the storyteller. What a, like, there's just something that really hits with that. I fucking love that. So, I'm not going to read this entire story. But overall, what happens here is that in the end, he says, fire is jealous of humans. He is angered by Earth's union with water and her friendship with the pelican, so he curses humankind with 13 ways to die. Once gods are, they are mortals now, weak as beasts. What shall they do? Who will lead them? Tell me. The Raybearer. Aheh! See, the pelican steals rays from the sun, blessing the first emperor with wisdom and compassion. You must choose 11 brothers and sisters, it tells the emperor, shaking oil from its wings. For every brow you anoint, you will gain immunity to one of the 13 deaths. Choose well, emperor, for to the world you will be as a god, but to your council you will yet be a mortal man. And the 12 causes are 13, my bad. 13. Poison, contagion, gluttony, burning, drowning, suffocation, bleeding, beast mauling, disaster, organ death, witches' hexes, battery, old age. Raybearers were blessed with only one immunity at birth, but after anointing a full council of 11, only old age could kill them, unless, of course, one of their council members turned traitor. So, I didn't get that was how this worked, but what a nice, solid, tidy reasoning for all of this to work. I think this lore is really smart and really interesting. And it feels fresh, you know? It doesn't feel like something I've read before. And I'm certain that there are stories out there with a similar sort of like conceit to them, but it doesn't ring a bell presently. And it just feels different enough overall that I just really wasn't ready for any of it. I like this a lot. So at this point, the priest is talking about, and he leers at the girls. His Highness must select his council sisters with special care, for they will birth all future Raybearers. His Highness is not permitted to marry, which I was surprised by. And she says, what happens when there's an empress? She interrupts here. As I have said, our emperors do not marry. No, I cut in. I meant, what about when the Raybearer's a girl? The priest inhaled, summoning patience, then smiled. There are no female Raybearers, child. Am has always chosen a man. That does not mean, of course, that female council members have no value. After all, you might bear a Raybearer. He winked at me. The empire will be forever in your debt. Oh, this is such a great illustration of the thing that women are always taught. That we aren't important, but we might give birth to somebody who's important. This is like one of the fundamental things behind like the whole abortion question. And people will be like, well, what if you abort somebody who could cure cancer? And it's like, what if she could have cured cancer, but she got weighed down with the child she didn't want? Like, but that never fucking occurs to anybody, you know? It's just never about us. We're not a factor. So at this point, it says, before I could respond, my chest began to burn. Someone had heaped coals over my heart. And she thinks that this is a response from the demon. I'm not entirely, like, I am unclear, but I think it's supposed to be that this is her connecting with his ray beginning here a little bit, but I don't know that that's what's going, like, the surges of heat had tripled in frequency once I moved to the children's palace. Now the burning was unpredictable, though it often flared during catechism. Sometimes I woke from dreams I didn't understand, from memories that seeped from the children's palace floor with the ghosts of girls who had features eerily similar to my own. I don't know. Maybe it had nothing to do with, I don't know. And let's see. No place made me feel more distant from Dio than the children's palace throne room. A platform of 12 wooden thrones rose before the candidates. As Dio, Kira, and the others took their elevated seats, I scanned the room for Sanji, but the towering pillar of his head and shoulders did not appear. So this is when somebody says, Zyongo, he steps forward and says, when the Jibanti are paired with candidates from Dirma, we always lose the timed logic puzzles. They slow us down. I think every member on a team should be from the same realm. Why mix figs with mangoes? Why should we Jibanti, hunters and scholars, be dragged down by empty-headed merchants? So, Dio tries to prove that the intelligence of the dervish is not inferior by asking one of his people to share the results of the testing according to region. And unfortunately, the testing results seem to show that they are underperforming in logic, weapons, and science. They show equal capabilities in god studies, griot craft, and statecraft. And Dio, who didn't bother to double check on this information before deciding to share it in front of everybody, looks like a real fucking idiot here. Meanwhile, Tarisai is sitting off to the side and she's like, something's up here. This doesn't feel right to me. And she starts thinking it through and realizes the sleeping mats and the way that things are structured. Candidates from Swana and Jabanti were likely to have names later in the Arit alphabet, while Dermish names occurred earlier. The sleeping mats were arranged by name. Candidates with names that came earlier slept farthest from the doors, making them last to reach the banquet hall. Running on virtually no food, those candidates would be exhausted for every trial administered before lunch: logic, weapons, and science. God studies, craft, and statecraft occurred after lunch and dinner, so in those trials they all performed well. The solution was so simple it almost felt silly. This is a major issue in our... So what's going on here, just to like overall, is that the testing itself is faulty because not everybody is given the same advantages before the testing even begins, right? So if you are from a particular group of people, you are more likely to be well fed. And this is true in life also. And this is part of the reason why breakfast programs in so many schools and free lunch programs are so important, because we don't like to look at the fact that a lot of children are malnourished in the U.S. It's just a fact. And this was a major part of the Black Panthers when they were attempting to do some fucking good in their communities. One of the biggest things that they were involved with was a breakfast program and providing a full meal to kids who weren't given, you know, a good nutritional, like rounded nutrition by their families. And it's just wild. It's so fucking gross. Like, just white supremacy goes in and just trashes shit. And I mean this in the most literal and metaphorical sense. But the Black Panthers were painted as like radical terrorists when a lot of what they were trying to do was simply even that kind of playing field in a really simple way, because that was a foundational issue. And they would like go and get groceries, and then white supremacists would come and just literally piss on all their food so that they couldn't use it. Like that kind of thing. It's that simple, you know? And I really felt like this was, like sort of pointing at that. And Dio doesn't agree to the unmixed teams, but he does say that he will give more like tutoring to the Dermish, which basically is like, I'm going to give them remedial classes, which makes them, one, look like they are less intelligent, and then two, exhausts them further when if they were just given equal meals, then everything would be fine. And this isn't resolved by the end of this. She doesn't actually tell him what the real issue is by the end of this section. And I really hope she does, because it would be just as simple to do like every other day. We go back to front instead of front to back with names on the list getting to eat first, you know? Why is it set up that it's the same people every morning that get an advantage? And when I say why is it set up this way, I think we know why it's set up this way. I think it's purposeful, and that somebody is trying to oppress the Dermish, and putting them at the end of the meal slots is on purpose. But we'll see. I'm looking at my time. I cannot believe I am almost at an hour, and I am not even through. What is this? I'm on chapter 8. Ugh, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm really behind. I'm probably going to have to finish this entirely in the next episode, but I'm going to try and do some quick coverage of some of the things coming up. Here comes the monologue I was talking about that Kira has about learning that what her parents taught her was wrong. So first, she talks about the spoiled brats who have never had like jobs. They've never had to worry about anything. And at first, Tarisai tries to challenge her and be like, well, do you think I'm spoiled? Well, yes. No one made you change soiled nappies or chase vultures for miles to find water or dry camel dung to fuel cook fires. But your mother never sang to you or made you cinnamon milk or stroked your hair when you were sick. I guess there are different ways of being spoiled. And that is an important distinction to make. But nevertheless, it's just a really different situation. Mama believes what the priests say, that people are like rocks stacked in a totem. Men over women, women over children. We accept our roles, or the whole tower falls apart. A songbird was not meant to soar as an eagle. And this is when Tarisai brings up Empress Ayatoro. Her name was Old Eret, and it meant peace from shore to shore. She ruled Aratsar for decades. She's the reason women can join the Imperial Guard. She founded the Imperial College, abolished the inter-realm slave trade. Wait. And then it turns out that Kira's getting like a message from Dio being like, he's wondering where we are. And she comes back and is asking, okay, sorry, what were you saying? And Tarisai's like, never mind. Not now. And she says something about Ayatoro because they're looking at all of these different portraits. My brow furrowed as I counted the painted emperors. Empress Ayatoro isn't there. They didn't paint her. Ayatoro was an exception, Kira said. I asked the priests about her. They say she was a fluke. Am only gave Ayatoro the ray because her father died without male heirs. An exception does not negate the rule. And when I first came to the children's palace, I used to fantasize about talking to Mama. In my dreams, I'd tell her, today I learned how to use a spear, or today I solved a logic puzzle faster than anyone else. And Dream Mama would say, my wise and disciplined girl, see how my Kira takes her good home training into the big world. But now, when I dream of Mama, I say things that make her frown. I say, why don't Blesseds ever let women lead the caravans? They do just as much work as the men. Or, why do Blesseds wash their hands after trading with other realms? Those people are no dirtier than we are. And Mama cries and says, where did my Kira go? Who is this sneering girl who spits on her home, who questions her elders? Does the world love you better than your family? Does it swaddle you at night and fill your belly with goat's milk? Where is my Kira? And I say, I'm here, Mama, but I'm not. Kira bit back a sob. I'm far away, Tarisai, from all of them, and the more I learn, the farther I feel. I don't know where home is anymore. This is something that I think isn't well understood by folks who aren't in a position like this. I fully admit to not having been in this position personally, but I watched Owen cope with it. When you begin to grow more woke about the world, you have, especially if you come from family that is much more closed-minded and bigoted, you're beginning to understand not only clashes with their opinions, but it makes them begin to look at you as if you're betraying them, which is something that there is no way to make that better. You can't fix that feeling. And especially when it comes to like perhaps having a religious problem, like Owen doesn't necessarily believe in the God that his grandparents believe in. And he knows that if he tells them this, they don't know this, that they will feel like they failed him somehow. That it's going to be more than they're being disappointed in him. It's going to be them like blaming themselves for his damnation, which is a wild, it's something that he just fundamentally doesn't believe and they fundamentally do. And I don't think that people really, if you haven't like seen what that is like in front of you, it's really easy to just be like, well, if they don't keep up with you, leave them behind. And it's like, it's not as simple as your opinions on other people. It shifts how they look at you now. And it's really, really hard, And that's not to say that you shouldn't just do it anyway, but it's difficult to know how to deal with that. And be ready to like disappoint someone and know that you're never going to be able to really turn that around. They're going to remain disappointed in you because you're not planning on going back to who you were and unlearning the things that you've learned. So you need to be at peace with how this shift that has happened will be permanent. unless they decide to shift themselves and what they think, which may not happen. And you don't have control over that. I just really loved that whole monologue and her struggle with it, you know? I liked it. So this is, I'm so over time. I really do need to wrap. I'm gonna finish this, and this is part of why I'm like, I'm pretty sure that this was over 50 pages. But we have the like conversation here where Dio is talking about the stripes in the mane on his mask that he doesn't yet have, which basically is him just talking out loud about the things that he can be killed by still, because he doesn't have anybody on his side with that yet. And it turns out that this is part of what his, her, I should say, Tarisai's accomplices feels like the wrong word because she's not in on it with them. She doesn't want this. But associates, they were listening and decided to take matters into their own hands. So when he says gluttony, contagion, and burning, they decide to try and burn the palace down and burn him alive. And it doesn't go the way they expected at all. I wish so much that I wasn't out of time. I'm sorry, Ashleigh. I think, according to the Kindle, I'm going to try and do about 35 pages per episode. And I think that will help with keeping this from happening next time. So I'm going to start next episode, guys, from here. And I'm about halfway through chapter 8. And hopefully I'll be able to sort of make up for going over this time and not finishing. I really like this book. There's so much to talk about, you know? All right. Thank you guys again so much for listening. Thank you again to Ashleigh for commissioning this book. It's been so much fun. I hope you all are enjoying it. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.